When Jungkook's world collapses after a devastating phone call, his mother turns to Taehyung with haunting words that change everything between them. The call that shattered everything. Don't answer that call. Jungkook, please. Taehyung's voice trembled, but it was too late. The screen lit up, and fate spoke in a voice colder than death. The room fell into eerie silence. Only the soft hum of the air conditioner seemed to remind them that time hadn't frozen. Jungkook stood still, phone clutched in a white-knuckled grip. His breath caught between his chest and throat like a scream that couldn't escape. The voice on the other end delivered the words with brutal simplicity. John Hyunwoo, your brother, is gone. There was no sound, no reaction at first. Just Jungkook's pupils dilating as though he were watching a building collapse in slow motion. His shoulders slackened, his legs buckled. He dropped to his knees, the phone tumbling from his hand and skittering across the floor. Taehyung was already beside him, arms around his best friend, before Jungkook could completely crumble. The funeral was a blur of black coats, whispers, and bitter coffee. Jungkook barely spoke. His face became a sculpture, flawless, still, and unreadable. Only Taehyung knew the kind of storm raging beneath that surface. He had known Hyunwoo too. They all had. He wasn't just Jungkook's older brother. He was their anchor, their protector. And now, he was a mystery wrapped in a coffin. No one knew why Hyunwoo was driving along the coastal cliffs at midnight. No one knew why his car went over the edge. In the days that followed, grief clawed at Jungkook like a feral animal. He didn't cry, not in front of anyone. Instead, he disappeared into himself. He stopped showing up for dance practice, ignored his phone, locked the studio door. Only Taehyung had the key. Only Taehyung dared to enter. One evening, Jungkook sat in the corner of the studio, staring at the scratched wooden floor like it held the answer to every unanswered question. The lights above flickered with a tired buzz. His voice was barely a whisper. Hyunwoo wouldn't have done this. He wouldn't just crash. Something's wrong, Tae, I feel it. Taehyung nodded, sitting beside him. His silence not empty but solid, like a shield. A week later, Jungkook's mother invited Taehyung to their home. The Jeon residence was dim, quiet. Portraits lined the walls, shadows dancing across smiling faces, now permanently framed in loss. Mrs. Jeon served tea but didn't touch hers. She looked older than the last time Taehyung had seen her, like grief had painted new lines across her skin in a matter of days. She finally spoke. Hyunwoo told me something 2 days before he died, she said, her voice low and deliberate. He was scared. He said someone was watching him, following him. Taehyung sat forward, tension wrapping around his spine like a vice. He didn't say who, but he said if anything happened to him, he wanted you to protect Jungkook. Taehyung's throat tightened. Me? Mrs. John reached into a drawer and pulled out a small black notebook. Its leather cover was scuffed and weathered. He trusted you. He didn't want Jungkook burdened. He wrote names in here, places, things I don't understand. But you, he said you would know what to do. As she placed the book in his hands, her gaze turned sharp, almost pleading. Her next words etched themselves into Taehyung's soul. Don't let my youngest become a weapon, Taehyung. And don't let him find out what his brother died trying to protect. Jungkook appeared in the doorway then. Eyes narrowed. Voice quiet. What are you hiding from me? Neither of them answered, but the silence was louder than any scream. The silence between them was suffocating. Taehyung couldn't move. Mrs. Jeon's trembling fingers still rested on the edge of the notebook, unwilling to fully release it. Jungkook's presence in the doorway wasn't loud, but it struck like thunder. His eyes locked onto the worn journal, now partially in Taehyung's lap. And Taehyung could see it, the fracture forming in Jungkook's trust. A slow, invisible split right down the center. What are you hiding from me? Jungkook repeated, stepping into the room. His voice was cold, almost unfamiliar, like he'd aged a decade overnight. Mrs. John straightened, placing her teacup down with care, but not calm. Her hands were shaking now. No one is hiding anything. She lied, and she was never a good liar. Her eyes betrayed her. The way she avoided Jungkook's gaze, the way her voice pitched ever so slightly higher, it was enough. Jungkook was a master at reading tone. Years in the industry had taught him how to detect even the smallest insincerity. This wasn't a lie to protect, it was a lie to bury. His gaze turned to Taehyung. Is that Hyunwoo's? Taehyung hesitated. Yes? Then give it to me. Taehyung didn't move. Give it to me, Jungkook said, each word cutting sharper than the last. Mrs. Jeon rose suddenly. No, she said. You don't understand, Jungkook. There are things in that book you're not ready for. Things that could destroy you. Jungkook scoffed bitterly. You think anything could hurt me more than this? He pointed toward the window, where the shadow of the shrine they had set up for Hyunwoo still flickered with candlelight. You think there's anything left to ruin? Taehyung rose slowly, the notebook still in his hand. His heart caught between two loyalties, one to the boy standing in front of him, wounded and furious, and the other to the final wish of the man who now lived only in photographs and memories. Hyunwoo gave this to your mother, Taehyung said gently. He wanted her to decide what to do with it. You have every right to know what's inside. But maybe not like this. Jungkook's jaw clenched. Not like what? When then? After what? After I break? After I lose someone else? You think I don't see it? You think I haven't noticed the way people talk around me now like I'm a child? Like I'm fragile? I'm not. I know you're not, Taehyung said quietly, taking a cautious step forward. But you're not invincible either. And whatever Hyunwoo was caught up in, it wasn't simple. Jungkook laughed, but there was no humor in it. Of course it wasn't simple. He's dead, Tae. People don't just drive off cliffs for fun. I know him better than anyone. I know when something's wrong, and all of you, you're acting like I'm imagining it. No one thinks that, Mrs. Jeon said quickly. Then stop treating me like a child, Jungkook snapped. You don't get to decide what I'm ready for. Not anymore. The notebook was heavy in Taehyung's hand. Not physically, but with meaning. With risk. He could feel the weight of every word written in it. The danger of what it might reveal. But he also knew this Jungkook was right. He had a right to know. And keeping it from him would only drive the wedge deeper. So, slowly, reluctantly, he extended it toward him. Jungkook snatched it without a word, turned, and walked out of the room. Mrs. Jeon slumped into her seat, as if the entire house had caved in on her shoulders. It's starting, she whispered. Taehyung looked at her. What is? She didn't answer. Jungkook didn't read the notebook right away. He didn't flip through it angrily or tear through its pages like a man possessed. Instead, he placed it on the edge of his desk in his childhood bedroom, still littered with old posters, unopened boxes, and a guitar he hadn't played in months, and stared at it. He stared at it for hours. The house grew darker. Lights were turned off. Doors shut. His mother went to sleep, or at least pretended to. But Jungkook remained there, unmoving, as if daring the book to open itself. It wasn't until 3:12 a.m. that he finally touched it again. The first page was empty. The second, a list of dates, all from the past year. Besides some of them, names, anonymous ones. Or so he thought. Until he reached a name he recognized. Choi Damin-jun III, disappeared after rehearsal. Jungkook's brow furrowed. He remembered Damon. A backup dancer. Young. Shy. They'd worked together briefly before she stopped showing up. It had been written off as burnout. Management had said she'd moved back to her hometown. But Hyunwoo had written, disappeared. Not left. Not quit. The next page held more notes, jagged, half-written phrases. Like Hyunwoo had been in a rush, or scared, or both. Beneath the studio. Code name. Winter Latch? Why are they watching the mirrors? Not safe. Not safe. Not safe. The repetition chilled Jungkook. His fingers trembled as he turned the next page. A map. Crude. Drawn by hand. It was of the entertainment company's building, but not the public-facing part. This was the lower levels. The basement. Storage. Places most artists never stepped foot in. Jungkook's hands clenched. Whatever Hyunwoo had been involved in, it had happened inside the company. He didn't sleep. By the time the sun rose, His eyes were bloodshot, his heart pounding with something he hadn't felt since before Hyunwoo died. Purpose. Downstairs, Taehyung was asleep on the couch, his head tilted back, mouth slightly open. He looked peaceful in a way Jungkook envied, but there was no time for envy now. Jungkook shook him awake. "We're going to the studio," he said. Taehyung rubbed his eyes. "Why? It's barely—" "I need to see what's in the basement." Taehyung sat up fully now. "What?" "There's a map. Hyunwoo left a map. I don't know what he found down there, but it's connected. I'm sure of it." Taehyung frowned. "Jungkook, if he didn't want you involved, he's not here to stop me anymore." The building was quiet when they arrived. Still early. Too early for rehearsals. The security guard barely looked up as they entered. The two of them had enough clearance to come and go. But Jungkook noticed something new. 2 cameras pointed toward the staircase leading underground. That had never been there before. They took the elevator to the 3rd floor and slipped down the emergency stairwell when no one was looking. Jungkook's heart beat louder with each step. The cold air of the basement hit them like a wall, musty and untouched. The door creaked open. Storage rooms lined the hallway. Locked ones. Taehyung tried a few knobs. Nothing budged. Jungkook followed the map, counting doors, until they stopped in front of one with no sign. No number. Just steel. He pulled out his keycard on a whim. The lock blinked red, then green. It opened. Inside was darkness. Not empty darkness, but filled darkness. Cabinets. File drawers. Dozens of sealed crates. A wall of monitors. Screens showing rehearsal rooms. Hallways. Dressing rooms. Taehyung inhaled sharply. "They're watching us." Jungkook moved toward the monitors, flipping through the controls. He didn't know what he was looking for until he found it a paused video, labeled simply, WL footage 6/3. He hit play. The screen flickered. There was Damon, alone, practicing. Then someone else entered. A man. Not a manager. Not anyone Jungkook recognized. She looked surprised. Nervous. There was no audio. The man handed her something. She stepped back. Lights flickered. The video cut out. Jungkook stared at the blank screen. His throat dry. "What the hell is Winter Latch?" Taehyung didn't answer. They both turned toward the filing cabinets. Each was labeled with letters. One read, WL. Jungkook pulled it open. Inside, at the top of the file, was a single photo. Hyunwoo, standing outside the company building, circled in red ink. Underneath it, a sticky note. Target. Compromised. Phase 2 advancement required. Jungkook's legs gave out. He fell into the chair behind him. They had marked his brother. He was being watched. He was a target. Hyunwoo didn't crash. He was silenced, and Jungkook had just opened the same door. Taehyung stood behind Jungkook, unable to speak. His breath fogged slightly in the cold air of the underground archive, the buzzing fluorescent lights above flickering as though struggling to stay alive under the weight of the truth they had just uncovered. Jungkook stared down at the photograph, his brother's face frozen in a moment that now felt like a prelude to death. The red circle around Hyunwoo's head wasn't just ink, it was a death sentence. He had been watched, followed, and then erased. The silence between them fractured as Taehyung finally moved. His hand reached out, trembling, lifting the edge of the photo from the file as if touching it might burn him. Underneath were more documents, typed memos with dense language and code names, acronyms that didn't make sense. Jungkook grabbed one of the folders and flipped it open, revealing surveillance logs, names, times, locations, notes about behavior patterns, psychological observations, photos clipped to corners, some of people they both recognized. Taehyung's voice was hushed. "They were profiling us." Jungkook nodded, though his expression remained blank. His body was still, like a bomb just before detonation. He pulled out another document labeled WL, Phase 1 Implementation. It described a program, some kind of psychological conditioning framework, designed to exploit emotional stress, to amplify dependency, to manipulate decisions. Artists were categorized into tiers. Jungkook's name appeared in Tier 0, highlighted Underlined, there were graphs of emotional responses during rehearsals, performances, even private interviews. The air in the room grew heavier. Jungkook stood up, the chair scraping back with a sharp screech. "They're experimenting on us," he said, his voice low. "We're not trainees, we're test subjects." A sharp metallic noise made both of them spin toward the hallway. A footstep. Distant. Heavy. They weren't alone. Taehyung killed the lights with a swift flick, plunging them into a darkness broken only by the faint blue glow of a single monitor left on. Jungkook carefully closed the file, grabbed as many pages as he could, and stuffed them into his backpack. The photo of Hyunwoo went in last. Taehyung eased the door open just enough to peer into the hallway. No one. He nodded once. They moved fast. Silent. They climbed the emergency stairs 2 at a time, bursting out into the empty hallway of the 3rd floor. Jungkook's heart hammered in his chest like a warning drum. Every window, every doorframe felt like a pair of eyes. The building, once a space of passion and creativity, now felt like a labyrinth of manipulation and control. When they reached the rooftop, only then did they stop to breathe. Seoul stretched out before them, the skyline bathed in cold morning light. Cars moved like blood through distant veins. Everything looked normal, but nothing was. Jungkook took out one of the documents, scanned it again. They were testing something called Winterlatch. It's a psychological gatekeeping system, conditioning artists to behave a certain way, to become emotionally malleable. Damon resisted. So did Hyunwoo, and now they're gone, Taehyung said quietly. Jungkook's knuckles turned white around the paper. "They're killing people!" Taehyung looked at him. "Then we need to expose them." The word expose echoed in the space between them. But Jungkook's mind was already racing ahead. Expose how? To whom? If this was real and it was they couldn't trust anyone inside the company. And going to the police? Laughable. They'd need proof, hard proof, and a way to make sure it reached the right eyes before someone made them disappear too. Jungkook made a decision. "I need to disappear." Taehyung looked at him, stunned. "What?" "They'll come after me. They probably already are. If I vanish, they won't expect me to come back as the one exposing them. I can dig deeper from the outside." Taehyung's face hardened. "You're not doing this alone." Jungkook finally looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time since Hyunwoo died, something alive flickered behind his eyes. "Then you're in?" Taehyung didn't hesitate. "Always." 3 hours later, Jungkook sent a text to his mother. "Don't worry, I'm alive. But I can't come home. I'll find the truth. I promise." He left his phone behind on a rooftop in Gangnam, smashed it against the edge of the railing until it split open, then tossed the pieces down into the alley. Taehyung did the same with his. They took a car to the outer districts, using back roads and cash only. An old friend of Hyunwoo's, a tech consultant who owed him a favor, met them in a rundown apartment above a shuttered arcade. Her name was Min Saiji, and she greeted them with wary eyes and a handgun holstered beneath her jacket. "What the hell did you drag me into?" she said after reading the files. Jungkook didn't flinch. "Whatever it is killed my brother." Saiji sat back, blowing out a breath. "This is bigger than just one company. You know that, right? These kinds of programs, they don't start in rehearsal rooms. They start in think tanks, in military contracts, in labs that don't officially exist. But they're testing it on artists," Taehyung said. "And we're the control group." Saiji tapped the table with her finger. "Then we need to dig up the source. Track the architecture of the program. Follow the digital fingerprints. And if you want to do that, you'll need access to the company's black server." Jungkook raised an eyebrow. "Black server? The one not on the grid. The one they don't admit exists." She turned her laptop around, showing a network map. Most of the company's infrastructure was accounted for studio schedules, payroll, security cameras. But a ghost network sat beneath it, hidden like bones beneath skin, accessible only through biometric clearance and coded keystrokes. "You have a week," she said. "After that, even I won't be able to keep you off their radar." Jungkook leaned over her shoulder, eyes scanning the data. "Then let's get to work." For the next several days, they operated from the shadows. Seiji taught them how to mask their presence, VPN tunnels, ghost MAC addresses, burner devices. Taehyung used his contacts in the media to start planting seeds, whispers about abuse in the company, leaks designed to distract. Meanwhile, Jungkook trained, not just physically, but mentally. He began reading Hyunwoo's notebook like scripture, decoding every scribbled note, diagram, and cipher. One entry stood out. The key is in the reflection. Jungkook stared at that sentence for hours. It wasn't metaphorical. He thought back to the security cameras in the basement, the rehearsal footage, the mirrors. One night, while Taehyung slept and Saiji worked late, Jungkook pulled up a saved file. It was a rehearsal video of his own performance 6 months ago. In it, he danced alone. The camera was fixed, but when he paused the footage, he noticed something strange. In the mirror behind him was a second figure, standing perfectly still. But there had been no one in the room. He rewound the video, played it again, saw a result. He zoomed in. The figure wore black, face obscured, watching, not him, the mirror. Jungkook's pulse spiked. He scrubbed through other footage. Different days, different rooms. The same figure appeared, always in the reflection, never in the room. He ran to wake Seiji. "It's not just surveillance," he said. "It's insertion." She rubbed her eyes. "What?" "They're not just watching us. They're testing. The presence, manipulation, altering reality through the mirrors. Like projecting something into our perception, making us see what isn't there." Saiji stared at the screen. "Winter latch," she whispered. "It's not a psychological program. It's sensory distortion. Neurological. They're training your brains to see what they want you to see." Taehyung stepped into the room. He had heard everything. "Then the figure," he said slowly, "isn't real?" Jungkook met his eyes. "Or it's real to us. And that's enough." By the end of the week, Saiji had cracked the path to the black server. But it required one last thing. Biometric access. Specifically, Jungkook's. "They've already scanned you," she said. "When you were onboarded, all I need is access to one of the secured studios where the scanner links to the internal net. You go in, I proxy through, and I can dump the data." They planned it for midnight. Jungkook entered the building alone, dressed like any other performer returning for a late-night session. The guards recognized him, smiled. No questions. Taehyung waited in a car nearby, listening through a comm link. Saiji guided them both through the feed. He reached Studio B, one of the rooms with wall-to-wall mirrors. The scanner lit up as he placed his palm against the pad. There was a brief hum. "You're in," Saiji whispered. Then the lights went out. Complete darkness. Jungkook's breath caught. The mirror in front of him flickered, not physically, but like something behind it was shifting, and then he saw it. The figure, not in the glass, but behind him. This time, it moved. Jungkook turned, and the door locked behind him. The sound of the door locking behind him was sharp and final, like the clanging of a prison gate. Jungkook spun around in the darkness, his breath loud in the deafening silence. The figure had moved again. He could feel it more than see it. Not a shadow, not a trick of the light, but a presence. Real, heavy, watching. "Saiji," he whispered into the calm, his voice tight with tension. "Are you still there?" Static. "Saiji?" No response. The faint blue emergency lights overhead flickered on, bathing the studio in an eerie, unreal glow. The mirrors stretched from floor to ceiling, endlessly reflecting the room from every angle. Jungkook's own figure stared back at him from every surface. But his eyes scanned the reflections for something else. The intruder. The figure. It had been there, and then he saw it, not in the mirror directly in front of him, but 3 panels down, in the far left corner. A tall figure in black, half shrouded by shadow, its posture stiff, almost unnatural. It didn't move. It didn't breathe. And it didn't exist in the room. Only in the mirror. Jungkook's blood ran cold. He turned, slowly, eyes locked on the exact spot where the figure should have been if it were real. Nothing. Empty space. But in the reflection, it still stood there. Watching him, he took a hesitant step forward. The figure didn't move. Another step. Still, unmoving. He approached the mirror. Every step closer amplified the sensation that he was walking into something unnatural, something the world itself had not designed. Like the room had become a simulation, coded not in architecture but in intention. The air grew heavier. His ears rang. The closer he got, the more distorted his reflection became until, at arm's length, it was no longer his face staring back at him. It was Hyunwoo's. Blood trickled from the corner of his brother's mouth. His eyes were hollow, lifeless, yet filled with accusation. Jungkook stumbled back, his breath catching in his throat. Behind him, a soft click. The door was unlocking. He turned, heart pounding, expecting a figure, a threat, anything. Instead, it was Taehyung, eyes wide with alarm. He rushed forward, grabbing Jungkook's arm. "We have to go. Now." "What happened to Saiji?" Jungkook asked, still disoriented. "She's back online. Someone jammed the signal for 30 seconds. She got us the server dump, but now the building's on internal lockdown. If we don't move, we'll be stuck here." Jungkook took one last look at the mirror. Hyunwoo's reflection was gone. Only his own frightened face remained, pale and drawn. They ran through stairwells and maintenance corridors, bypassing the main exits where security had begun patrolling. They reached the underground parking lot, just as the alarms began to wail sharp, shrill notes that pierced the air like sirens from a war zone. Inside the car, Saiji's voice burst through the comm again, now clear and urgent. "They know. They know you accessed it. I've already rerouted the data to an external vault, but they're triangulating your location. Get us a route out of Seoul," Taehyung snapped, driving fast, one hand gripping the wheel while the other adjusted the rearview mirror constantly. "Preferably one without cameras." "I'm on it." The road ahead twisted through the sleeping city, neon lights still blinking in the distance like the last vestiges of normalcy. Jungkook sat in the back seat, the hard drive containing the data clenched in his hands. He couldn't stop replaying what he saw in the mirror. His brother's face, the blood, the expression. Was it a hallucination? A projection from the Winter Latch program? Or something worse? "Do you believe in ghosts?" he asked quietly. Taehyung didn't answer right away. "I didn't," he said eventually. "Until now."
The safe house CG had prepared was in the outskirts, an old farmhouse half collapsed, surrounded by wild grass and forgotten by time. They parked behind it and entered through the back, where blackout curtains had already been drawn over the broken windows. CG was there, eyes red from lack of sleep, fingers dancing across her keyboard. "I've only decrypted part of it," she said, not looking up. "But what I've seen is enough to make my skin crawl." She turned the laptop toward them. Lines of code ran across the screen, hidden folders, encrypted logs, embedded within them video files. Taehyung clicked one. A sterile white room appeared on screen. A man sat inside, wrists strapped to a chair. Electrodes lined his scalp. His eyes were wide, darting around, terrified. A woman in a white coat stood behind him, watching a monitor. "He's responding to the third-tier protocol," she said to someone off-screen. Full immersion achieved. The man began to scream. Not words, just pain. His mouth opened wider than seemed humanly possible, a soundless agony as his body convulsed. The lights in the room began to strobe. Behind the mirror on the far wall, a figure appeared, just like in the rehearsal room. Not a ghost. A weapon. The video cut to black. CG said nothing, neither did Taehyung. The silence was filled with a heavy understanding. Winter Latch wasn't just psychological warfare. It was visual reprogramming, an induced psychosis that weaponized perception, and they were the test subjects. Jungkook stood, stepping away from the screen. He couldn't bear to see more. The room felt too small, too full of things unseen. "Hyunwoo knew," he whispered. "That's why they killed him." "Not just him," CG said. "Anyone who showed resistance. Damon, that man in the video, dozens of others, and the files show Phase 2 has already begun." "What's Phase 2?" Taehyung asked. CG hesitated. "It involves going public. They've identified select idols to push forward as cultural leaders, those who tested highest for susceptibility and reach. Through them, they'll roll out mass triggers, music videos, commercials, even live performances. Jungkook's voice was cold, brainwashing through art. CG nodded. It starts with visuals, then sound, then emotion. They rewire what people respond to, what they fear, what they worship. And who's behind it? Taehyung asked. CG's expression darkened. The files reference something called Division Pale, not government, not corporate, something older, funded through offshore accounts and private donors. She turned the screen again, revealing a symbol. A white moth against a black circle. It was the same symbol Jungkook had seen in Hyunwoo's notebook. Suddenly, the laptop beeped. A proximity alert. They weren't alone. CG killed the lights. Outside, 2 cars pulled up on the dirt road, black, unmarked. 4 figures emerged tall, dressed in tactical gear, faces hidden behind masks. They moved like shadows, synchronized and silent. Jungkook's heart slammed in his chest. They tracked the upload, CG hissed. Taehyung grabbed Jungkook's arm. We have to run now. They burst through the back door into the overgrown fields, ducking low. The wind howled through the grass, masking their footsteps. Behind them, the safe house lit up in flashes, muzzle fire. The sound of glass breaking. Yells. They didn't look back. They ran until their lungs burned, until their legs gave out, until the night swallowed them whole. And when they stopped, somewhere far beyond the last streetlight, Taehyung turned to Jungkook. We can't outrun this. Jungkook nodded. Then we fight it. Stars above them blinked faintly, indifferent to the unraveling world below. The air was thin out here, far from the city's heartbeat, replaced by the haunting lull of insects and wind. Jungkook sat with his back against the base of a pine tree, the weight of his brother's death, the files, the mirrored ghosts, and the symbol of the white moth pressing down on him like a mountain. Taehyung crouched nearby, scanning the dark horizon with a pair of binoculars CG had given them days earlier. There was no sign of pursuit now. No headlights, no drones, just stillness and the memory of gunfire ripping through the safe house like thunder. Jungkook's mind replayed the image of the man strapped to the chair, the mirrored figure, his own reflection twisting into Hyunwoo's bloodied face. His fingers tightened around the strap of his backpack, still stuffed with files and CG's final decrypted drives. She hadn't escaped. He knew that. He didn't ask. Taehyung hadn't confirmed it either, but they both carried the silence of truth. Her last words to them had been shouted across static, encrypted and urgent. Don't go to the media. Don't go to the government. Find the one they buried, the one they failed to break. His name was Taehyung. And then silence. The connection cut, the line dead, CG gone. Jungkook pushed away the thought. There was no time for grief. Not yet. He opened the last hard drive she had given him, plugged it into the solar-powered device rigged with offline decryption tools. Lines of code poured down the small screen, then a directory appeared. Project Mirror Eclipse. SUBPROJCT, Winter Latch. Target file, subject JH01. Status, MIA/classified REDACTD. Taehyung. Subject JH01. MIA. Taehyung, Jungkook murmured aloud, as if speaking the name might summon the man from the shadows. Taehyung looked over. That's our next move. Jungkook nodded slowly. He's the only one who might have made it out. We don't know where he is, or if he's even alive. We'll find him. The next morning, they crossed into the southern provinces under fake names, wearing caps and masks, their bodies worn but minds locked on a single thread of clarity. Taehyung. Through back-channel forums CG had left access to, they traced mentions of a man who had once been part of the earliest iteration of Winter Latch, before the project had a name, before it had mirrors, when it was still theory. A psychological experiment conducted in remote training facilities masked as talent camps. funded not by entertainment companies but by corporate proxies owned by faceless shell organizations. Taehyung had disappeared during a scheduled transfer. No record of arrival, no death certificate. But there were rumors. A former medical intern in Daegu remembered a patient years ago, brought in with severe neural trauma, speaking in loops about voices behind glass. He was placed in psychiatric hold for 2 years before vanishing overnight, his file sealed. A monk in a secluded temple outside Jinju claimed a man had come to them 5 winters ago, half-starved and mute, leaving behind only a drawing of a broken mirror and the word latch carved into wood. They followed every lead, every dead end, until finally, in a crumbling seaside town where the cliffs curved into jagged teeth against the ocean, they found him. He lived in a house no bigger than a shipping container, hidden behind tall reeds and rusted sheet metal. A wind chime hung from the crooked porch roof, made from keys that didn't fit any door. When Taehyung knocked, nothing happened. When Jungkook said the name Taehyung, the door opened. He was thinner than the photographs in the archive, if the man in front of them was truly Taehyung. He looked older than his age, hair graying at the edges, his eyes sharp yet hollow, like someone who'd walked too long in darkness and had grown accustomed to it. "Who sent you?" he asked, voice hoarse. Jungkook held out Hyunwoo's notebook. "My brother died trying to stop them. We're trying to finish what he started." Taehyung stared at the notebook as if it were radioactive. He took it slowly, flipping through the pages with trembling fingers. "So it's begun again," he muttered. "Again?" Taehyung asked. Taehyung stepped aside and gestured for them to enter. The inside of the house was a museum of madness. Walls lined with notes, photographs, surveillance captures, diagrams of human brains with highlighted neural zones. Strings of red thread connected points on the walls, looping between timelines and names. Damon, Hyunwoo, dozens of others, including Taehyung's own. "They used us to study perception distortion," he said as he poured them bitter tea. "They started with colors, then sounds, then light patterns. Eventually, they moved to reflections. That was the breakthrough." "Why mirrors?" Jungkook asked. Taehyung's eyes darkened. "Because mirrors don't lie, but they do reflect what the brain tells them to. If you can alter perception, you can control what a person believes is real. You can make them see their fears or their gods. You can make them obey." Jungkook leaned forward. "How do we stop it?" Taehyung laughed, a hollow, broken sound. "You can't." Jungkook said nothing, just stared. "Eventually." Taehyung sighed. "But you can expose it, and that's what they fear most. They've spent years perfecting this in secret. If the truth comes out, the world won't trust the screens anymore, and their entire system depends on screens." He stood and walked to a sealed cabinet. From inside, he pulled out a silver case. It clicked open with surgical precision. Inside, a mirrored disc. "It's not a weapon," he said. "It's a key. This is the original footage, the failed first test. It's the only copy. I stole it the night they burned Facility Zero. This will make them burn again." Jungkook reached for it. Taehyung hesitated. "Once you take this, they'll come for you harder, not to erase you, to break you, to turn you into a vessel for their program. They'll hollow you out and make you their message." Jungkook's voice was calm. "Let them try." They left that night, taking the disc and a copy of Taehyung's wall notes, which mapped a trail of secret meetings, underground labs, and offshore accounts. The plan was clear: broadcast the footage, leak the files, force the world to look into the mirror and see the truth. But nothing ever goes to plan. They were intercepted crossing back into Seoul. Black SUVs, unmarked, a roadblock in the middle of the countryside. This time they didn't run. They fought. Taehyung used a flare CG had given them to trigger a signal burst that knocked out local surveillance. Jungkook, armed only with instincts and desperation, took down 2 of the agents using blunt force and misdirection. But the 3rd agent caught him off guard. A blow to the head. Pain exploded behind his eyes. He fell, and everything went black. When he woke, he was in a room flooded with white light. He was strapped to a chair, electrodes on his skin, a mirrored wall in front of him. A woman in white approached. "We've been waiting for you, Jungkook." He said nothing. "We don't want to erase you," she said. "We want you to lead." Lead what? The world into clarity, into silence, into control. She gestured, and the mirror in front of him shimmered. It showed him on stage, a concert, lights flashing, fans screaming. But their faces were blank. Identical. Like masks. "We can give you everything," she whispered. Hyunwoo refused. He was weak. "You're stronger." Jungkook's fists clenched. In the mirror, he watched his reflection begin to smile. But he wasn't smiling. Something was wrong. His reflection moved out of sync. Behind him, the woman didn't see it. But he did. And then the mirror cracked. Just slightly. But enough. Enough to break their illusion. And in that moment, Jungkook understood. They didn't control the mirror. He did. He screamed not in fear but in defiance, and the glass shattered, sending shards of false reality flying. The electrodes shorted out. Sparks flew. And the room descended into chaos. Somewhere outside the facility, Taehyung activated the emergency protocol. The world would soon see everything. Because mirrors may reflect, but they can also reveal. The air reeked of ozone and burning circuitry. Sparks sizzled across the floor as Jungkook ripped the electrodes from his arms and staggered up from the chair, the restraints now hanging limp, molten at the edges from the electrical burst that had surged through the system when the mirror shattered. Alarms had not yet begun. It was quiet, too quiet, as though the system itself was stunned. For the first time since entering the building, Jungkook felt the illusion collapse in real time. The walls, once glowing and seamless, now flickered and buzzed at the edges. Panels distorted like reflections on the surface of disturbed water. He moved quickly, stepping over the shards of the mirror. His own fractured image reflected back in hundreds of tiny angles, his face split and remade. It was symbolic, and he knew it. What had just happened was more than technological, it was psychological. They had tried to break his identity, to rewrite him through his deepest desires and fears. But the mirror had turned on them. It hadn't shown him a fantasy. It had shown him their control, their lie. And that, paradoxically, had awakened him more than any scream or jolt of pain. He found the hallway beyond the door unguarded. Either they had underestimated him, or more likely, the system that monitored this wing had been routed through the mirror, a self-contained neural feedback loop that had now short-circuited. Whatever their plan had been, it hadn't accounted for someone like him. Jungkook ran. Corridor after corridor, the walls turned from pristine white to exposed concrete, as if the illusion wore thin the deeper he went. On the 4th floor down, the sterile white lights gave way to flickering red emergency strips along the floor. That was where he found the first sign of resistance. A pair of guards in black, armed, sweeping the hall. He ducked behind a support beam, his breath steady. He waited, watched their pattern. They weren't looking for an intruder, they were looking for a threat. That meant they didn't know he was loose. He used that to his advantage. As they passed, he lunged, fast and precise. One went down in silence, the other turned too late. A punch to the throat, a slam of the head into the concrete. Both dropped without a gun fired. He took their ID cards, their earpieces, and the sidearm from the second guard's belt. A moment later, he was sprinting again, this time with a direction. He had seen it in Jae Hwan's diagrams, Facility 4, the control hub. That was where the servers were isolated. If he could get there and upload the footage from the mirrored disk, it would transmit through the buried fiber line CG had mapped out. That data stream couldn't be stopped once activated. It would pulse through hidden satellite uplinks and piggyback onto dormant media caches. It would be irreversible. The truth would flood the network before they even knew it had started. At the end of the next hall, a reinforced door marked with the moth symbol stood closed. He pressed the first ID card to the scanner. Denied. The second. Accepted. The door slid open. The room inside pulsed with low light and hums. Dozens of terminals glowed faintly, each one manned by operators in identical gray uniforms. But their faces, they were blank, not emotionless. Blank. Their eyes didn't blink. Their hands moved in perfect synchronization. It wasn't human. Winter Latch had advanced further than he feared. He stepped inside slowly, the gun raised. None of them moved. As he passed between the rows, a chill ran through him. The hum was deeper now, vibrating in his bones. He reached the core server terminal at the back of the room, a biometric pad. He pressed the hand of the second guard he had taken down against the scanner. It accepted. The console lit up. He inserted the mirrored disk. Data began to transfer. That was when the operators stood. All of them. Together. As one. Their heads turned to face him. Their mouths opened. And a tone began to emit, not a sound, not really. It was a frequency. Low, harmonic, designed to destabilize. Jungkook dropped to his knees, clutching his head. The gun clattered to the floor. His vision swam. But the upload, he had to finish the upload. He crawled forward, fingers scrabbling against the tile, reaching the keyboard. The sound drilled into his skull, like glass splintering behind his eyes. And then it stopped. The lights blinked out. The hum vanished. A crash. Gunfire. And a familiar voice shouting his name. Taehyung. Jungkook looked up through blurry vision to see Taehyung standing over him, rifle in hand, breathing hard. Several of the operators lay motionless on the floor. Others had fled into darkness. How Jungkook gasped. You activated the failsafe, Taehyung said, lifting him to his feet. Your biometric trigger, it sent a ping to Jae-hwan's remote relay. We traced it. We followed it. We found you. Wei. A third figure emerged from the shadows. Jae-hwan. Alive. Wearing body armor, armed, eyes burning with cold clarity. No more running, he said. It ends tonight. Together they secured the core room, rigged the door with magnetic locks, and finalized the upload. The mirrored footage, the first and purest exposure of Winter Latch's true form, streamed out into the world via every channel CG had once hijacked. Social media, news feeds, dark web threads. Within minutes, the footage was replicated thousands of times across the globe. And the reaction was instantaneous. Online communities erupted with speculation, horror, validation. Survivors came forward, former trainees, dancers, actors, artists who had seen the mirror, who had felt their minds twist and had never known why. Parents recognized the symptoms in their children. Activists mobilized. The moth symbol became public enemy number one. The media couldn't bury it. Governments were forced to acknowledge the documents. The house of cards began to fall. But it wasn't over. Not yet. Jungkook, Taehyung, and Jae-hwan knew there would be retaliation. The people behind Winter Latch weren't a company. They were a syndicate, rooted deep, older than any nation. They had existed for decades under different names, evolving their tactics. Now exposed, they would grow more desperate. So they took the fight to the final facility. A compound deep in the mountains, hidden behind a hydroelectric dam, accessed only by air or a single tunnel. Jae-hwan had mapped its existence long ago. CG had confirmed it in her last packet. The command center. The brain. It was there that they would sever the spine of the operation. They infiltrated at night, through the water shafts beneath the dam. Taehyung led the way, disabling the sensors. Jungkook followed, armed with a modified signal disruptor they had built using parts from Taehyung's cache. Taehyung moved with the precision of someone who had once designed the very systems he now sought to destroy. Inside the command center, they found them. The architects. 6 figures seated around a white circle, their faces masked by porcelain, their voices filtered through vocal modulators. The moment Jungkook entered, they turned in perfect synchrony. "We knew you'd come," one said. "Then you knew we wouldn't leave," Jungkook replied, stepping forward. "You're too late. The program is global now. A seed planted in every screen, every reflection." "But the roots have been burned," Taehyung said, raising his weapon. Taehyung moved to the central console, inserting a kill code. Alarms blared. The architects stood but didn't run. They didn't need to. Behind the glass walls, hundreds of mirrored surfaces began to vibrate, glowing faintly. A failsafe. One final burst. One last attempt to overwrite perception. The mirrors lit up. Jungkook looked into them and saw himself. All versions of himself. Broken, afraid, controlled. He stared. And then he whispered, "I am not your weapon." The mirrors cracked. The surge failed. Taehyung activated the detonation. The architects didn't move. They watched as the world they built collapsed in fire. Later, the mountain was silent. No facility. No mirrors. Only ash. Jungkook stood at the edge of the cliff, the wind brushing through his hair. Taehyung stood beside him, bruised but alive. Taehyung sat nearby, eyes closed, breathing deeply as if for the first time. "It's over," Taehyung said. Jungkook shook his head. "No," he said, "it's just the beginning." Because mirrors could be shattered. But the reflection remained. And now, the world was finally ready to see. The sky above the ruined facility was turning a pale violet, the first sign of dawn stretching across the torn fabric of night. The mountain air was colder now, laced with ash and memory, each gust brushing across Jungkook's skin like a ghost reluctant to leave. Smoke coiled up from the remnants of the command center, where the last echo of Winter Latch had been buried under concrete and fire. The earth itself seemed to exhale relief, as though even it had been holding its breath all these years. But Jungkook felt none of that relief. He stood at the edge of the cliff, overlooking the dam, watching the pale light reflect in the churning water below. His arms were crossed, and the wind tugged at his hair, but his expression remained still. Not blank, but heavy, thoughtful. Beneath his skin, his muscles remained tight, as if bracing for something that had yet to arrive. Taehyung approached from behind, stepping over a twisted metal beam and patches of blackened soil. He didn't speak at first. Instead, he came to stand beside Jungkook, shoulder to shoulder, letting the silence stretch out between them the way only brothers in arms could. "You're still waiting for them to rise from the rubble," Taehyung finally said. Jungkook didn't look at him. "You saw the mirrors. You saw what they did to the people they touched. You saw what they were building. That kind of system doesn't die just because we crushed the last visible piece of it. We hit the heart." "Maybe," Jungkook said, "but hearts have backups, shadows have shadows, and Winter Latch wasn't just a project, it was a mindset, a belief system, that people can be controlled through fear, through image, through the weaponization of their own reflection. You don't kill something like that with fire, you only delay it." Taehyung nodded, quiet. "Then what do we do?" Jungkook turned to face him, eyes sharp with clarity. "We rebuild, but not as soldiers, as storytellers." Taehyung frowned. "Storytellers. They used art to enslave, we'll use it to free." Below them, the valley was waking up. Birds, tentative in the ash-dusted branches, began their cautious morning songs. In the distance, the first reports were crackling across the networks. Footage from the mirrored disc had gone viral. Leaked videos of the experiments, the confessions of surviving operatives, Jae-hwan's broadcast. It had all hit the web within hours. No one could ignore it anymore. And the world was reacting. Every news outlet from Seoul to Sao Paulo was covering it. Experts debated the psychology behind it. Religious leaders condemned it. Protesters marched outside entertainment conglomerates, demanding transparency. Laws were already being drafted, but most importantly, artists had begun to respond. Jungkook had seen the messages in his encrypted inbox. Dancers, singers, film directors, illustrators. Creatives who had once worked under the shadow of perfection, now reaching out to say they understood. They remembered the hallucinations, the dissociation, the crushing pressure to be something unreal, and now they wanted to help dismantle it. It wasn't an army, not the kind Jungkook had imagined in the early days of the war, but it was something far more powerful. It was truth with rhythm. Jae-hwan emerged from the smoldering ruins of the facility, his jacket torn, face smudged with soot but upright. Something in him had softened, though his eyes still held the same wild focus. He looked at them both, then up at the rising sun. "It's not dead," he said simply, echoing Jungkook's thoughts. "No," Jungkook replied, "but it's wounded." Jae-hwan joined them at the cliff edge. "You understand what comes next, don't you?" "They'll adapt," Taehyung said before Jungkook could answer. "They'll evolve, hide deeper, use different tools." "They might already have," Jae-hwan added, "but they've lost their silence, and silence was their strongest weapon." Jungkook turned to face him. "We need to make sure they never get it back." That night they left the mountains behind. They moved from safe house to safe house, using ghost names, hidden channels, disappearing between border lines. They built a network, not of rebels but of voices, survivors, creators. They hosted underground exhibitions, held private viewings of the mirrored footage, hosted salons in abandoned warehouses where music and light and movement reclaimed spaces once used for manipulation. Jungkook recorded again, but not for fame. He wrote songs filled with encoded memories, visuals that shattered perfection and exposed fragility, performances that showed breaking as a form of freedom, not failure. Taehyung filmed everything, documentary style, raw, unfiltered. The story they told wasn't just about Winter Latch. It was about every person who had ever looked in the mirror and hated what they saw. Because of a system. Because of a lie. Because of an image. And as their message spread, so did the counterattack. A digital war emerged. Anonymous figures began to erase evidence of the mirrored footage, burying it in disinformation. Deepfakes attempted to discredit Jungkook's identity. Fake confessions were released, manipulated to paint him as mentally unstable. But it didn't work. Because for every lie released, Jungkook released a new song. Each one sharper. Each one more honest. And people listened. They didn't just stream his music. They wept. They wrote back. They healed. He became something he had never intended to be, not a prophet, not a rebel, but a mirror that refused to lie. A mirror that showed pain and allowed others to see their own without shame. But the cost was high. One night Taehyung was taken. They came for him not in violence but in silence, slipped into a safe house in Busan and left only a note, pinned to the door with a knife. "Return what you took, or he vanishes." Jungkook held the note in shaking hands. It was a trap. He knew that. But he couldn't leave Taehyung behind. Jae-hwan tried to stop him. "It's a black site. You'll walk into a mirrored hall and never come out." "I don't care." "Yes, you do," Jae-hwan said. "That's why you'll survive it." The coordinates led to an abandoned hotel in the mountains of Gangwon province, a place once famous for winter retreats, now claimed by snow and silence. Jungkook went alone, carrying nothing but a flash drive embedded beneath his skin, the final backup of the mirrored disc and the transmission codes for a new wave of exposure. Inside the hotel, mirrors lined every wall. He walked through himself for what felt like hours, until he reached the ballroom. And there Taehyung stood, alone, unharmed. But behind the mirrors they waited. Not in bodies but in projections, faces that twisted, flickered, danced between familiarity and distortion. The architects hadn't died. The facility destroyed in the mountains had been a decoy. They had never relied on location. Their real existence was digital, patterned, scattered across networks, hiding behind mirrors that lived in every device. "We underestimated you," the central voice said, "but even clarity has limits." Jungkook walked toward Taehyung, slow, deliberate. "And you overestimated your ability to control me." "We don't want control," the voice said. "We want convergence. You and us. You understand reflection. You understand fear. Together we could rebuild the world." Jungkook stopped, looked up. "I'm done rebuilding lies." He reached behind his neck, pulled the skin trigger. The flash drive activated. Every mirrored surface in the room glitched, then went dark. The architect screamed, not audibly but through the speakers, the screens, the air. Feedback waves shattered windows. Lights exploded, but Jungkook didn't stop. He reached Taehyung, grabbed his arm, and walked through the fire. Behind them, the network collapsed. Files overwritten. Programs purged. The last remnant of Winter Latch deleted. After that night, the world shifted. Not in obvious ways, but in small ones. A teenager in Jakarta posted a song about her trauma, unedited, unpolished, and it reached 2 million people in a week. A street artist in Berlin painted cracked mirrors on the walls of underground stations with a single phrase beneath, "This reflection is yours." A director in Los Angeles released a film shot entirely with broken lenses. It won a global award for its depiction of distorted truth. And somewhere in Seoul, Jungkook stood on a rooftop, watching the city breathe, no longer afraid of what stared back at him from the glass. Taehyung came up beside him. "We did it," he said. "No," Jungkook replied, smiling faintly. "We're just getting started." The wind carried their laughter down into the alleys, into the screens, into the hearts of millions still healing. And the mirrors. They remained. But they no longer owned the truth. People did. The world didn't change in an instant, though people wished it would. The fall of Winter Latch was a fracture in the illusion, a crack that let the light in, but healing was another journey entirely. Jungkook understood this as he watched Seoul move like clockwork below him from the rooftop where he and Taehyung had stood weeks ago. The city was still alive, still beautiful, still breathing, but it was no longer blind. After the final confrontation at the mirrored facility in Gangwon province, after the fires burned down the last sanctuary of those who had orchestrated years of invisible terror, something shifted, not in the governments, not in the companies, but in the people. For the first time, millions stared into the glass of their screens and wondered who had been staring back. And that question, once planted, could not be unasked. Jungkook stepped back from the edge and lowered his hood. His face was no longer hidden. He walked freely now, no more disguises, no more underground routes. There were still dangers, yes. There were still those who sought to rebuild what had been lost, but fear could no longer define his movement. He had become something else, not a symbol, not a martyr, but a witness. He turned as the studio doors opened behind him. It was not the studio they had fled from long ago, not the place where Hyunwoo had once practiced late into the night before disappearing into shadows. This studio was new, built in an old railway station on the edge of the city, reclaimed and reimagined. They called it Studio Vanta. No mirrors, only light, only sound. Inside, dancers moved like fire through the open space, no longer bound to choreography dictated by silent watchers. They improvised, they collided, they rose, Every gesture was honest, unpolished, real. Taehyung filmed them in long takes, letting the movements speak in raw cuts. He edited with minimal interference, letting human breath and error shape the pace of the final pieces. Jungkook walked through the space, nodding to each of them, his presence grounding. When he stepped into the center, the music paused. The dancers watched him, expectant but not reverent. He didn't demand their awe, only their attention. He began to move. Slowly at first, like wadding through thick memory. His limbs carried the weight of everything that had come before. Hyunwoo's death, CG's sacrifice, Jaehwan's scars, Taehyung's resilience. The rhythm was low, pulsing from the ground like a heartbeat long buried. Then faster, then soaring. His body told the story no press release ever could. How truth bends, how mirrors shatter, how freedom feels like running barefoot in the rain. When the song ended, no one clapped. They didn't need to. They understood. Later that evening, Taehyung joined him on the rooftop again. He carried with him a small device, silver, rectangular, sleek. It was the last remnant of the old system, a captured kernel of winter latch code. They had debated for weeks whether to destroy it or study it. Taehyung set the device down between them. Jaehwan thinks we should keep it, archive it somewhere no one can reach. A reminder. Jungkook looked at the device. A seed. Taehyung nodded. Yeah. A seed can grow again, Jungkook said softly. But it can also rot. They sat in silence. The decision wasn't made that night. Instead, they returned to their lives as artists, as builders of truth. Jungkook released his first full-length project in 2 years, Reflection Without Frame. It wasn't a traditional album. It was part audio, part video, part interactive exhibit. It included recordings from before the collapse, whispers from black sites, refracted footage of his own face morphing into Hyunwoo's, into the architect, into nothing. It was art that refused to entertain. It challenged. It scarred. It healed. Some called it disturbing. Others called it holy. A year passed. Then two. The world, as expected, evolved. New forms of media emerged, transparent screens, neural immersion tech. The mirrors came back, not the literal ones, but the concept, always watching, always promising beauty. But this time the people were wiser. Laws were passed. Networks became decentralized. No one could own an image anymore, not entirely. Still, there were whispers. A journalist in Vienna found remnants of the moth symbol in a startup's codebase. A child in Tokyo began drawing figures. She said she saw in her tablet's reflection. An artist in New York claimed her installation began talking back. Jungkook tracked these events, quietly, methodically, not as a soldier but as a guardian. He didn't fight them with weapons. He fought them with sound, with story, with light fractured into truth. One night he returned to the apartment where his mother now lived. She had aged, but her eyes were the same. When she saw him, she touched his face gently, as though confirming he was still real. "I saw your latest piece," she said, "the one with Hyunwoo's voice." "It was time," he replied. He would have been proud. Jungkook looked away. He would have kept going. "And you have." They drank tea on the balcony, watching the city blink below like a field of fireflies. She reached into a drawer and handed him something wrapped in cloth. It was Hyunwoo's last journal, the one she had kept hidden, even after giving Taehyung the first. Jungkook opened it. The pages were scattered with thoughts, none fully formed, sketches of choreography, lyrics, musings about the nature of art in the age of surveillance. One passage stood out. "When they break you, don't rebuild the same. Become something they don't have language for, a rhythm without pattern, a reflection they can't predict." Jungkook smiled faintly. That night, he returned to Studio Vanta. He walked alone into the center of the dark room, turned on a single light, and began to dance. There was no music, no camera, only movement. And as he danced, he thought not of the architects, not of the battles, not even of victory. He thought of the mirror and how it no longer mattered, because he had finally learned how to move without needing to look.